Good evening.
There we go. Hi.
So we got a request last time for us to have our talking heads on the screen with you all, along with the PowerPoints that we have. I'm Lois Van Leer. I'm the minister at the Woodinville Unitarian Universalist Church here in Woodinville, Washington. And you are?
And we will pause in between talking so we don't overtalk. I'm Peg Morgan, and I'm the minister at Westside Unitarian in West Seattle. And one of the things about having our faces on the screen the whole evening will be that you won't be able to match your audio with our lips. But if you don't mind that, you can look at our eyes, not our lips. Then we'll leave the faces up there because you did ask for it. There's a lag. So, well, we're glad to be back with you. We'd like to light our chalice this evening with some words from Reverend Dr. Stephen Papa. He said that ministry is the process of changing context, making things sacred by seeing them in a larger context, doing things for a higher purpose. Ministry is not just what one does, but how and why. It's done with reverence, care, honor, and respect. If those qualities are present, we are doing ministry.
Thanks, Peg. We wanted to tie up any loose ends from the last session, and the folks from Calgary said, hey, weren't you going to pass around the PowerPoints from the last session? And we have not, but it looks like Peg said, yes, we'll get it posted. My question is, where will it be posted, Peg or Lori? Anybody know?
Lori, someplace on the PNWD or on, well, this is Western Region. Lori, are you there?
Okay, what she just typed in for everybody is that the recording is on the website, and she will post the PowerPoints there as well. And we will figure out before our last, our last session where we will be posting the additional resources that Peg and I have put together. One of the sort of loose ends from last time that we talked about, Peg and I were talking about, is what do we call folks who are actually receiving the care of the lay pastoral associates? And I don't have any big thoughts on that. Do you, Peg? Did you have some particular thoughts?
You know, I've struggled with this with teams of lay pastoral people, and generally I don't like the word client for a church community. And so the best I've come up with is care receiver. But I wonder if any of the people watching have some other ideas. And if you would like to type them in, we would be glad to share other ideas so when you're talking sometimes, and you'll see in our presentation tonight, sometimes we need to refer to that role of being the person receiving the care. So what do we call them?
So Tahoma just typed in congregant, and we would say recipient, not receiver, from Calgary. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing is that in the time that I've been doing this program, it's never come up. We just talk about members of the congregation that we're working with. We just talk about folks that we have been working with. Mm-hmm. And there's an inherently, when a minister is in a role, because of their position of, quote, supposed power and authority, which is definitely questionable in UU congregations, whether the minister ever does have power or authority, but the reality is that a minister, a clergy person, is in a power role. So it automatically sets up an imbalance of, quote, power or in the relationship and the dynamic. In a lay pastoral situation, it's truly peer-to-peer, even though people may feel, quote, less than if they seek somebody out, seek the counsel, seek somebody to be with them in relationship. And the lay pastoral associates, that's what we call them in my congregation that I've worked with, would certainly not say that they're better than anybody else. They just would say that they're accompanying somebody at this point in their journey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, another loose end was we had referred to the value of having lay pastoral associates do some careful self-assessment about their life experiences and what experiences might be advantageous for them in the role of a lay pastoral associate and which experiences might be maybe too fresh. Maybe they haven't quite processed enough about what happened to them. So we wanted to say a little more about that, and we'll post this on the Western Region website. But I have a little questionnaire that I hand out, and it asks, what is your life experience? What have you had in your life that would be really important for your supervisors to know in the program? And it could be things like perhaps you've had domestic violence experience in your life, maybe sexual abuse, maybe you've had a stillbirth, perhaps gay and lesbian issues in your life or identity, loss of job, chronic illnesses. There's a lot of things that we all as human beings experience. So we've listed a number of them on the sheet just to get people thinking. And then also, what kinds of problems in life would you think that you shouldn't be helping with, that you just don't want to, and why? So these questions really help us understand ourselves more as we're going into the caring role, and also help the manager of your program to have a pretty good idea about matching you with congregants.
And there's no judgment involved with this. This is simply a self-assessment. I think it's really important to say, this issue is something I'm not comfortable dealing with, or there's that wonderful word that everybody uses these days, trigger. I am triggered by this happening because, being exposed to this reminds me of my own experience and what's happened to me, and I'm not comfortable with this. The other thing is, you may not be resolved in an issue. It may be too soon for you to accompany somebody on their journey. One of the things I always say to ministers, you can preach about something, but only when you're on the other side of it. So it's the same thing for those of you who are on a care team. Once you're on the other side of grief, for instance, as opposed to the middle of still grieving, is when you are probably in a better position to accompany somebody who's grieving.
And how do you know if you're on the other side? Perhaps when the memory comes up or the topic comes up, you feel pretty much that you have your equilibrium. Then that's a pretty safe bet. And then another question is, what professional knowledge do you have? And that's that question that we dealt with last time of sometimes people are therapists and they have certain backgrounds or other professions. And to think about those, some of them can be helpful, but also to think about them from the point of view of what role have you had professionally that is not appropriate to bring in to the lay pastoral role.
Peg,
so those are all self-reflection questions.
You're breaking up a bit. Yes, thank you, Calgary. I just wanted to say that you're breaking up a bit in your audio, so I just want to repeat a bit of what you just said, which is sometimes people who are in professional caregiver roles, it may or may not be helpful for the lay pastoral role. For those of you who may have missed last session, and it doesn't help to remind even those of us who were attending the last session, we aren't looking necessarily for therapists or counselors or I keep changing the slide. My apologies.
It's okay to light the chalice.
We don't need people to be professionals to do this. I mean, a lot of folks who go to church who may be professionals don't want to volunteer in their field because it's kind of like a bus person's holiday. We're looking for people who can lead with their hearts and know how to accompany people who have good boundaries. You're not here to therapize. You're not here to provide advice. You're here to journey alongside of someone who's going through something in their life. And that doesn't require a degree. And sometimes those of you who might be on the care teams may want to consult with somebody in your congregation, as Peg mentioned, outside your congregation, when an issue comes up and you don't feel as if you have the skills to deal with it. And if you are in your gut and your intuition feels like the issue that's come up with this person is more than you know how to handle, pay attention to that and check in with another lay pastoral associate, or if you're in a congregation that has a minister, check in with that person, and or potentially if you're lay-led, check in with a neighboring congregation that might have a minister. It's really important that you honor and maintain boundaries.
Good.
Anything else for loose ends? Do any of you have any questions from last time? Please feel free to type in the chat box.
Okay. No, nothing yet. We'll go to presence. Tonight's session is about the role of presence, to explore the ministry of listening presence. What is it? What hampers it? How do we prepare ourselves to be good listeners? Isadora Duncan, who is a beautiful early 20th century dancer, shares an exchange that she had with a friend who was visiting her in a time of grief. Isadora lost both her children in a car accident. And this is what she said about the experience with her friend. She encouraged me to repeat to her all the little sayings and ways, and to show her their photos, which she kissed and cried over. She never said, "Stop grieving," but she grieved with me, and for the first time since their death, I felt I was not alone. And I think that's, while we're not trying to do therapy, we can't solve people's problems. We do solve the problem of being alone by accompanying people. Shakespeare said it very poetically when he said, "Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the overfraught heart and bids it break." So the need for us to speak our grief, but to speak our grief when someone is listening, is so much more powerful and begins our process of getting to know our own self and what we're going through.
Gerard Egan, who is a psychologist, says this. He said that when we listen, we become aware of all the cues that the other emits. And he goes on to say that we don't just listen with our ears, we listen with our eyes and with our sense of touch. We listen with our minds, we listen with our hearts. We not only listen to the words of others, but we also try and listen to the messages that are buried in the words or somehow encoded in the cues that surround the words. So we who are listening, who are practicing to be in presence, we listen to another person's voice. We watch the demeanor. We pay attention to the vocabulary that they're using. We watch the gestures that they are using. We look at the context of the situation. We look at the verbal messages and we look at the body movements.
I'm told I'm still breaking up. I hope I'm okay right now. Okay. So in my own words, what I think our purpose of lay pastoral ministry is, and the ministry of listening, is for one person to share and disclose with another about their life and what they're going through. And inherent in the voicing of their life experience, of talking about it, they get to come to know more about themselves because of that opportunity to concentrate and deeply listen to themselves. They hear their own truth in a way that we often don't hear for ourselves when we're alone. So the purpose of being a listener for someone else is not for us to really know what's going on for them. That's really not the main purpose. The main purpose is for us to be able to help the care recipient or receiver to get to know themselves more fully. And there's a deep spiritual synergism that's going on then between two hearts. One of the hearts is sharing, and the other one is remaining lovingly open.
I think we used this definition last time, Peg. It's by a now deceased clergy person, Nell Morton, who said that we hear one another into speech.
Yes. Is that cute or what? So what we would like to do now is have you take a couple minutes to think in your own mind and heart back into some memory of when you feel like you were really well listened to. And when you think about that, think about the other person and what was it about the other person that made you feel safe and helped you to talk and share? What were the qualities of them as a leader? When you have, after a couple of minutes, most of you are in groups, perhaps you could jot down as you're thinking some of those qualities. And then when your groups are ready, someone could be assigned to start typing in some of those qualities so that we could all see what people have experienced. And Lois and I are going to be quiet during this period because we don't want to be distracting for you. Okay?
What do you think, Peg? We've got a lot out here.
Good ones. Good
Yeah.
ones.
Should we try to go for the top just to, yeah. And people, you can feel free, please, to keep on typing in. There's no time limitation. I'm just trying to go up here and see where we start.
So eye contact was
Huge here.
Mm-hmm.
What did I say? Yeah. The not being distracted. Somebody said, Calgary said they don't interrupt with their own story. And there may be an occasional request for clarification or amplification. Again, eye contact.
Non-judgmental.
Mm-hmm. Sort of that, nodding, giving sort of encouraging sound. Yeah, I was thinking of that. I didn't know what to call that.
Mm-hmm.
Again, no interrupting, occasional request for clarification or amplification. I love it. I love the one, the right questions. Hopefully we know the right questions. Again, the eye contact, one's body posture when you're listening to somebody, may be the ability to maintain silence, and mirroring. Do you want to say more about mirroring, Peg?
Well, were you thinking about the mirror neurons that you and I were talking about?
Yeah.
Some of you are aware of the research about our brains and how we have neurons in our brains that when we're with someone, we pick up on cues from them and we feel what they're feeling because it's just a mechanism that happens between human beings because of the way we're wired, and they're called mirror neurons. This person that wrote mirroring may have been thinking of something else. They may have been thinking about perhaps expressing what they thought they heard from the person. I'm not sure.
Or giving feedback, maybe?
Yeah.
I think. Anyway, we'll get into that.
Yeah, reflecting back. I think silence was mentioned also, and now that one is a hard one. I don't think it's easy for us to be silent because we have a tendency to want to fill up the space. But a little silence is good to allow the person to just keep thinking and not feel like they have to talk.
Silence can be very uncomfortable for people, especially after they've just sort of laid their souls bare, and you're sitting there with it as the one who's listening to this, and they may feel like, aren't you going to say something? But so what I'm saying is silence can go both ways. It can be really wonderful to be heard, and if you don't give people enough feedback or that sort of encouragement, what was that somebody, Tahoma used really great words for that. I forget what it was. They can feel like they're not being heard.
Mm-hmm.
Great feedback from you all on that one. Great feedback. You want to say any more about this, Peg?
I think that we're going to get into this a little bit more in a few minutes.
Okay.
That gets us going well.
All right. So we want to talk up to you now about what is active listening. We talked about, being silent, being present with. So as you are engaged in the process of trying to actively listen to somebody, you're trying to really follow their thoughts. You're trying to follow their feelings. It's not about you at the moment. You're trying to follow them. And you're trying to hear and understand without judgment. Try to hear their perspective, where they're coming from. And doing that, sometimes repeating back to them, lets them know that they're being heard. I love this slide. I couldn't help but put it in here. What you can't maybe see is that poor dog's little tongue is coming out of the side of its mouth instead of licking the boy who is crying. But when we do this kind of active listening, when we are present to another person, remember that they are giving us, we who are listening, the gift of vulnerability. We always think about, if we're the, quote, caregivers, or we're the ones who are sitting with people who are going through something, that is we who are giving. But how precious is that gift of vulnerability? And yes, in return, we give them the gift of our presence, which is precious to them. And so,
that's,
go ahead, Peg.
And that's what human intimacy is about, that safety, that's a mutual safety.
And so when you're getting started with somebody, you go in and you're trying to talk, you want to use sort of broad opening statements to allow them to begin the conversation, and they get to be in charge of what gets discussed. They get to, quote, set the agenda. You might ask questions like, so, Peg, where do you want to start? Or, Linda, tell me what's going on for you. Or, Richard, you've been having a hard time? Say more about that. Or, Carl, can you tell me what's been going on in your life? So they're not yes/no questions, obviously. They are leading questions. You're trying to give them the chance, once again, to begin where they can and to get to what they need to say to you. Once again, we want to remind you to listen without judgment to people. It's hard sometimes. Stuff comes up for us, or what we feel and think, what our values and ethics may not be in sync with what theirs are. So it's important to try to, what was that card I used to have above my desk? It says, less judgment, more understanding. Less judgment, more understanding. And so once again, listen for the words, listen for the feelings, try to take in the nonverbals. And you might want to look at the contradiction if you're sensing it between a person's body language and their words. Like they're saying, I'm not upset, and they're, totally anxious and moving their body all over the place, or you can see them, doing what I'm doing, which is rocking back and forth, or using their hands, maybe their skin gets flushed. You might want to gently point that out to the person, not in an accusing way, but say, boy, I hear you saying that you're feeling really calm, and yet, wow, your face is really flushed, and your hands are moving and really big and in front of you, and can you tell me more about what's going on for you? Or just elaborate.
Mm-hmm. Lois, I think it's so important to do what you said, of letting them choose where they're going to start, because that's respectful of them, and it's respectful of believing in their ability to know what they need to talk about. We don't necessarily know. We may have heard that there's a certain thing happening for them, but we don't know what aspect of that they're going to want to talk about. So I really like what you said about just say to them, where do you want to start? So having listened a little bit to them, there are a number of ways in which you can let them know that you are really with them. And I'm going to talk about a few of those ways. When we're actually with someone, we don't want to be thinking about categories of response, but it's sometimes helpful to think about it when you're pondering this role. So acknowledging the person's feelings in a number of ways. One may be to restate or paraphrase what they have said. You feel you can't go on. Perhaps they use those words, and you might just use the same words. And what we often find is by simply saying some of the same words they've said, then they know you're with them, and then they can say more, and they do. Reflecting on what you've said, what they've said, what you've heard, saying something like, I'm thinking this is a scary time for you. Validating. Yes, it's confusing with so many different opinions that you've been receiving. You might also, if in some part of the conversation you feel like you said something and it got them off track just about the time they were going to say something more, you can say, I think I cut you off earlier when you were talking about your worries about something. Did you have more you wanted to say about that? So you can refocus. And then encouraging the story, asking for more. What happened then, you might say? And, well, what was your father like? Just encouraging them to yes, Lois.
Sorry, when you're saying that, I realize there's a difference between asking a question that gets someone to tell more of the story and getting really sidetracked and interested in the story and wanting to know more details that have absolutely nothing to do with the need of the person who you are sitting with. That is, I mean, I just get interested in what people are saying. I'm like, oh, wow, I want to know more about this. That's not relevant. Then it becomes about me and not about them. So as you said, it's the story, it's to elicit, the questions are to elicit, help clarify, bring more out.
But following what they're saying, not your fantasies, riffs. And then it's okay to share some of your empathetic feelings, saying I'm so sorry, or to ask them, how are you handling this? How is this for you? So some of those clarifying questions, and letting them know that. Go ahead.
Sometimes I'll just say, wow, that sounds really hard, you know, and it just to feed that back, just to sort of let them know that I'm with them with that sometimes people can minimize what's going on with them. They can, mostly we talk about drama queens or kings, people who just want to blow everything up and everything's an issue in the drama. But there are a lot of people who need validation that, guess what? Yes, this is a hard thing that's going on for you.
And sometimes that recognition will bring tears because, wow, another person realizes how hard this is. Maybe I can realize how hard it is for me too. And then sometimes tears can come. And then we want to be comfortable with tears. We want to not be scared of tears. It's actually, I think, a really good sign when someone feels like they can let a tear fall down. It's a sign that they're feeling safe. But when someone does cry, one of the things we were going to say a little later, I'll say it now, is don't hand them the Kleenex. That sends the message that they should dab their tears and stop crying. So Lois and I both have a practice of having tissue in our office handy for someone to take and reach if they want to, but we don't hand them the tissue ourselves.
Before you go into the next part, Peg, I wanted to go back to when when you talked about restating or paraphrasing. It's really interesting. Sometimes when people have been carrying something around inside them for so long, I mean, there's a tremendous relief in letting it out, giving voice to it. But it's also that words said out loud are a little bit different than when they're caught in your head. And it also makes it more real when you finally verbalize it to another person. It's almost, I want to use the word witness, not in terms of a evangelical giving testimony, but you are a witness to what has been going on for them.
So powerful.
Sorry, Peg, I interrupted. Go ahead.
Okay. One of the things that's helpful is to then clarify what you've heard, and that's part of what Lois was just saying, is witnessing. Part of the role of witnessing is hearing deeply and then saying what you think you heard so that they know what you've heard. Sounds like you're dealing with a really, whatever it is, ... Are you saying that it's difficult to talk to your partner? Asking the question. And sometimes they'll say, no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm really saying ... And that's fine too. they can correct you if you get it a little bit off. What's the hardest part of this? Is a question that I sometimes ask. Is there anything else that you're feeling? Again, that's not leading anywhere, but it's helping them go deeply. It's just really important to describe, if you're responding, to describe what you're hearing rather than use evaluating words. So perhaps the person is talking about, let's say, their partner, and they're having difficulty with their partner. Maybe their partner's angry a lot of the time. So rather than saying, boy, it sounds like she's really, really an angry person, a creep. You would never want to say evaluative words. You would more say, you probably just use the words they say rather than evaluation. And in all of our comments, when they're talking, our comments should be brief. Try to keep our comments to a sentence or two. And another question or comment you could say is, when they're trying to figure out what to do, you might say, what has been helpful in the past for you when you've struggled with this? The orangutans. How does it feel? I'm not sure I understand. Tell me a little more. Or another phrase, I imagine you're upset. I think I understand. Is it that you feel scared to walk into the door, not knowing what's going to happen? And then they can tell you whether that's what they feel or not. And you might just use wonder words. I wonder if that's embarrassing. I wonder if you're just getting really tired of this. So those are just some of the phrases that we can use to help them know that we're listening and to help them say more and understand themselves more.
And one of the things that's awkward or lost in doing this, talking about being a care team provider or a lay pastoral associate, is that we're doing it via a web, in the sense that, Peg and I are just speaking out into space, and there's not a real opportunity for us to be in the same room with one another and practice some of this. So I know that when Peg does training, she has people, really just listen, sit across from each other, and the person gets to talk for a certain amount of time, and the person gets to practice listening, and then you give each other feedback about that. So I would encourage you, if you are in a group, or I know I heard from Ben that there's only one person here tonight, get somebody else, take this information back and practice it. A lot of us are so used to jumping in to fix things and wanting to offer our advice or this, that, and the other thing, and it's actually the harder task, just to sit and be present and be guided by the person's need as opposed to our need to fix. Mm-hmm. All right. Peg's favorite part, the next part we're going to get into, things to avoid, pitfalls.
It's really tempting to self-disclose. If someone's talking about something and it reminds you of something in your own life, it's tempting to launch into your own story. Maybe out of a feeling of, well, if I tell my story, maybe they'll feel better or something. Whatever our motivation is inside us, it's not our time to share our story. This time is for them. So resist the temptation to make it your time. And talking too much, feeling like you have to fill all the silence. Don't feel that way. It's, in fact, sometimes when I'm with someone, I talk about silence so that we have an understanding that it's okay to have silence, that we actually have that as a covenant. And then it's more comfortable for everyone. Sometimes, and I think Lois referred to this a few minutes ago, sometimes something will have been said, and it's really important to say something, that if they just said something really big and you're silent for quite a while, then that's a disconnect too. So it's kind of the art of when to fill in and when not. But and try not to be the one that changes the subject. Let the flow go where they want to go. And false reassurance. You're going to be okay. I know you're going to get through this. It's just going to be a matter of time.
Should I tell them that story about the ICU that I told you about?
That would be good.
So I just want to tell you about false reassurance. I was with a colleague going up to ICU, filling in for another colleague who was out of town, and they had a parishioner in ICU in terrible condition. So we went up there. I was still new to ministry, and I was just taking my cue from my colleague. And the colleague just said to them, "You're going to be just fine. I've seen people in worse shape than you are going to get out of here." And I was horrified, to be honest with you. The person had so many tubes coming in and out of their body they couldn't speak, but they were able to write. And they were able to write down that just said, "I'm so scared." And just to say to them, "You'll be fine. Don't worry, I've seen people in worse shape than you. Get out of here." That totally misses what that person is trying to tell them. It couldn't have been any clearer what they were asking for. They were asking for a different kind of reassurance, like, "Yeah, I bet it's scary. I hear you that it's very frightening. There are no guarantees. You don't know what's going on. This is so sudden, blah, 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 blah." So I thought I'd just insert that and try and warn you from that.
We've already talked about not giving advice and not trying to fix the problem. If someone does ask, "Well, what should I do?" I would be more comfortable redirecting that question to something like, "Well, what's the first thing you're thinking of that you might want to do?" Or what do you see as your options? And get them thinking rather than us feeling like we have a need to tell them or that we should be able to tell them what to do. We don't really know what the best thing is for them.
And that question to them, Peg, of turn it back to them, not to be avoidant, but to say, well, what do you want to do?
Right. Right. And of course, we want to avoid platitudes. Things like, you never get anything in life more than you can handle. I'm not sure about that one, how true. I don't think that's true. I think we often get things that it's pretty difficult to handle. And then, everything happens for a reason. That's a hard one to hear, too, when you're really hurting.
You know, I think it's Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, who wrote, what is it, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, Who Needs God, all those kinds of books. And I can't remember which one it's from, but he talks about a situation in a hospital where a Protestant minister went up to provide spiritual care for a woman who had just lost her young child. And he said to her, "God never gives us anything more than we can handle." And her response to him was, "Then I wish I wasn't so strong because my child would still be alive." Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the perfect comeback for me. We have this is my belief, we have no idea why these things happen. You know, it's not about, a lot of people do ask those questions about why, but I think the most important question in these sorts of situations is how. How are you going to survive it? How am I going to get through this? Mm-hmm. And again, not even to give false platitudes there. It feels like when you lose a child, your own life ends. you feel like you can't go on either. So you're not going to say, hey, you're just going to get over this. Everybody gets over this. It's not true.
Mm-hmm.
It feels as if it's impossible, and it's really important to say, I know it's impossible. This is impossible work.
Mm-hmm. You have another Rabbi Kushner quote.
I do?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. I thought that was it.
You're never old enough to lose a parent.
Oh, that actually, when I lost my own mother, someone from my former congregation said that to me and said, you're never old enough to lose your mother, is what she said. Mm-hmm. But I translate that into we're never old enough to lose a parent.
It hurts. It always hurts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I see. Yes, I was supposed to say that. Sorry, everybody. The other pitfall, Peg, that big one right here.
What's that?
The other big pitfall of arguing with a person and trying to convince them about something and change their view and tell them,
Right.
As we were talking about earlier, is that you may not agree with it, but it is their view.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not trying to talk them out of anything unless it's unless they are a harm to themselves or to another person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you have a star story, don't you?
I do. I have, it's probably one of my favorite stories that I've ever heard. And it was Clark Wells, who's one of our Unitarian ministers. He reported on how he learned about how he wasn't being a very good listener for his son. And isn't it true that all of these listening skills have applicability to our home life? Sometimes that's the last place we put them, but being good listeners at home is really important too for our loved ones. So his little 3.5-year-old boy tried to gain his attention. Now, he was sitting at a table, and the deck of the house was right by the table, and the little boy went out on the deck, and it was nighttime, and he was looking up at the sky. And he came in back to his dad and said, "Look, Dad, look, a shiny star." And Clark was really busy, and then his wife came in to talk to him, and they were trying to figure some things out. And so he just said, yes, I see the star. I'm busy now. I'll talk to you later. And on hearing that, the little boy came up to him, threw himself in his lap, and said, "You be glad at that star." I just love that. Daddy, please listen to me and join in with me about the delight that I'm having right now. I need you to hear me and how delighted I am about this amazing thing up in the sky I just saw. So, yes. All right.
One of those sort of the last pitfalls that I think we both wanted to bring out is, once again, is to be really careful about any statement that can be perceived as being judgmental, because it will immediately shut a person down and make them not feel safe to share anymore. And we don't want to do that. I mean, the goal is to, once again, hear people into speech.
So how do we prepare? First of all, when we know we're going to meet with someone, we want to be careful to set up a time that really is good for both people. That they're not going to be rushing and they only have a short amount of time. Just make sure that it's a time when you can give full attention to the person and not be rushed. And pick a space that's appropriate. And this is interesting because sometimes people want to meet in a public place, and that may be as a method of maybe a little bit of emotional protection. I think when you're in a public place, you will be reluctant to go very deep or share tears. So ideally, probably you would be getting some space at the church, or you're making a home visit where you have privacy and other family members aren't going to be moving in and out. So a good space. Yes, Lois? Were you going to say something?
You never know what's going to come up. The person may think they've come to talk to you about this or that issue, and something else comes up for them, and it's huge emotion. Somebody once asked me they wanted to talk to me, and I said, sure, let's go out for lunch. We went to the sushi restaurant, and it was lunchtime, and we're crammed in between tons of people, and it turns out her marriage had fallen apart, and she is, first of all, never eaten sushi, so she's chasing her food around the plate with these, not knowing how to do the chopsticks. She is, sobbing, and there are tears coming down her face. We've got people all around us. I thought, I just made a huge error in judgment. So I think space is really important. Lots of people say, hey, let's just go to Starbucks. Starbucks isn't the most secure place, if you will. It's very public. It's very public. But I think what Peg said, if you do have a church building or a fellowship building, I think it's really important to try and find space there.
Mm-hmm. So that's the space part. And then there's your inner space part that you want to consider. And I think this is very much like meditation. It's about emptying your mind of your thinking about things that have just happened to you, or thinking about something you're going to do later in the afternoon. You really want to prepare yourself and empty yourself of distractions. Perhaps even do some meditation or prayer before you meet with the person, focusing in your breathing and bringing yourself fully present. And as you are preparing yourself, remind yourself that you do not need to solve any specific problem other than the fact that the person doesn't have to be alone. So you are accompanying, you're not having to solve their problem. And trust the other person's inner capacity. When Lois talked about let them lead off where they want to, that's respecting their inner capacity. That's the worth and dignity of them, to know themselves and to discern what they want to talk about, and also what they think they might need to do as they move on with whatever they're troubled with. So those are some of the things. That's the spiritual preparation.
I had the privilege of taking a wonderful class from a Zen practitioner who started the first Zen AIDS hospice in the Bay Area when AIDS was, first really beginning in the 80s. And he talked about walking the halls, and he's already, as he's walking the halls, walking toward the rooms, he's already bringing himself into a meditative process. As he reaches for the handle on the door, he is already trying to place himself in the presence of whatever will be on the other side of that door. As he opens that door, as he goes in to be with that person in that bed or in that chair, he is already done the prep work ahead of time. So it's just a continuation of the work that he's already been doing. The other thing, just to remind all of us that when we are offering care, being a lay pastoral associate, a member of a care team, it's not about us. It's about the person that we are accompanying. And the other thing you need to know is that you're not alone in this accompaniment with that person. And I'm going to say that it's twofold. One is that hopefully you're part of a team. If you feel like you're in over your head, you can go to them. If you're lucky enough to have a really solid team that you feel close to, you have your clergy person, if you have a clergy person at your congregation. And the other thing is that we need to be reminded that we are asking the spirit of love and open-heartedness to be with us. That is part of what I mean by not being alone in this work. And there are many ways to listen. So as I said earlier, listen with your eyes, listen with your ears, listen with your mind, with your heart. And the biggest one for me is with your intuition. Pay attention to your intuition. It will allow you to be present in ways you probably didn't even know, or ask a question that that person had no idea that they needed to hear. That's the right question for them. Somebody mentioned earlier that asking the right questions is a really important part of listening. The other thing that Peg and I were talking about is sort of making yourself maybe a preparation card, like a little index card of all the things that you need to do to be prepared before you go in to have this sort of conversation, to be with somebody. I can give you an example of not being prepared. We, in my congregation, have someone who just lost a dog that was a competitor, a dog that was very competitive nationally. And you're all going, yeah, you're upset about a dog. Well, I was very attached to that dog, and so when I went to be with their house, with them at their house, it was very hard for me not to just lose it, just to bawl. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't prepared. I did not give myself enough time in between things. I didn't have Kleenex in my pocket. I needed to be on a different place with it before I went to offer them care and support. Does that mean we should never cry with our people? No, not at all. But there's still a difference of crying sort of in empathy, in compassion for somebody, and it being all about us. I mean, oftentimes when someone starts crying, a lot of other people will start crying. I mean, it's like that mirror neuron that Peg was talking about. But there's a difference in sort of like sharing, being with them as you cry with them, as opposed to you all of a sudden having to be the person who is now in need and taken care of. You've been so mm-hmm. triggered. Mm-hmm. So I think those little preparation cards, little reminders are really helpful. And it's each person has a different way that they prepare. So there isn't Peg and I aren't going to say, here you go, everybody, use this. Figure out what you need, what works for you.
This is just what works for us.
Right. So I prompted you all just a little bit ago that if you had questions, to please type them in, and nobody seemed to have any questions. And can I believe that's true? Maybe they're sleeping.
Are we still connected?
Wait, we think you all have done a fine job. Okay. Before we go to this part, Peg, I can explain why. Let me just explain why I have this up here. The photos from Flickr. So all the photos that you've seen that I've used tonight are from what's called the Creative Commons from the site Flickr, which means that we have permission to use them. And this is just part of good etiquette, both in not just for webinars, but on Sunday mornings and in our church life together. And Peg, do you want to talk a little bit more about our next session?
Mm-hmm. Next time we're going to cover things like what policies you should have for your team related to ethics and boundaries, record keeping, legal issues. What are some of the different ethical issues? What about how do you do resources and referral? And how should you think about the future training for your teams? What ongoing meetings and training topics might be useful for your team? So those are the things for December 18th is our third session.
And if there's something that you would like Peg and myself to go into more depth on, or you think of something in between now and next month, please feel free to send them either to us or to Lori, who is your sort of facilitator for all of this, and she can get them to us. We're happy to make sure we go into those things in detail. If there are, go ahead.
That sounds good.
All right. And Lori, thank you for posting that there, elragona at uua.org. And once again, we will do our darndest to get up almost all of the resources that we have referred to and our PowerPoints We'll get them to Lori, who will post them. Lori, you already told us where we're going to post them on the PWR.
At the regional, Western Region website.
And she said that she was going to email it all to everybody who has registered. So everything we get to her, Peg, she will get to everybody.
Yay, Lori.
Thank you, Lori. And unless anybody else has any questions, go ahead, Peg.
I was just wondering whether University Unitarian ever got connected. I'm not sure, huh? Okay.
Bummer. They get to listen to the recording too.
I guess so.
They disconnected. All right.
Okay, they can do the recording. All right.
Okay, so we will leave you for this week till next month with these words. That which is worthy of doing, may we create with our hands. That which is worthy of repeating, may we speak with a clear voice. That which is worthy of remembering, may we hold in our hearts. And that which is worthy of living, may we go and live now. Peace be with you, and our gratitude to all of you for attending this webinar. May this season of Thanksgiving be yours, and the coming of the light. Take good care. I'm going to turn off the recording now.
Good night.